Greetings, Paul from Canada. And
greetings. I'm glad to be back on your show again.
It's great to have you back. And of course, the inimicable Dr. Jim Saleam. Greetings. Now, Paul, as a Canadian nationalist, and you were just mentioning earlier how you're going to be running in an assume it's a council election. How do you feel about this talk by Donald Trump of annexing Canada? That must rub you up the wrong way.
Yeah, I'm an admirer of Donald Trump. He's done an awful lot of good in the 3.5 weeks of his presidency. He's pretty much scrubbed diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's just cleaning out the Augean stables of corruption in their foreign aid, where they're funding trans plays in Guatemala and counseling for LGBTQ people in various third world countries. That much is very good. He certainly is living up to his promise to stop the immigration invasion and to start deportation, and that's for real. That's happening. His fantasy about Canada being the 51st state, I absolutely don't see it. There's virtually no support for that, right, left, or center in Canada. There's no enthusiasm for that. There's no mass agitation. It's not as though he's playing into a popular sentiment. He's not. It's hard to know what he's trying to accomplish. If the Americans invaded, they could take us over in 48 hours. We have virtually no armed forces. Those that we do have are overweight, under-equipped, demoralized by feminism and DEI. It wouldn't be a contest. But I'm not sure what he would want us as the 51st state for. We're 41 million people. We would be as big as California. And in terms of electoral votes, more often than not, we would probably be voting Democratic. I don't see how that helps. So if we were to become the 51st state, electorally, we would probably more often than not vote Democratic. I don't see how that would be an advantage, unless we were divided up into
the provinces of Canada,
10 or 11 states. It makes no sense, and we already have, pretty close economic integration. I don't know if this is a big bluff or just to annoy our present left-wing prime minister who's on his way out. I don't know, but there's no enthusiasm for it, and it has caused a real backlash. A lot of people are now saying we're going to only buy Canadian goods wherever we can. We'll only buy Canadian liquor or maybe other liquor from other countries, but not American liquor. And there's a real he's really stirred up a lot of antagonism that needn't be there. I admire a lot of what Trump has done, but I do not admire his policy in the Middle East, and I do not admire the way he's treating Canada. Another thing is that it's reminded certainly me of some saying that countries don't have friends, they have interests. Right. And Canadians have, I would say, since the Second World War, pretty much taken for granted that America was our friend, and we'd helped them in several wars, in the World War II and Korea. They were Johnny-come-latelys to World War I. But we've shared a lot together. We've shared NORAD, the North Atlantic air defense system, the distant early warning system, There's a lot of friendship. A lot of Canadians flee the cold and go down to Florida or Arizona in the winter. There's basically good feelings, and anti-Americanism, such as it was usually a thing of the left. America's an imperialist power and all that stuff. And what they have done is that they have alienated a lot of people. And I think from a nationalist point of view, we have got to take our own border seriously. And that's one of Trump's demands in terms of threatening the 25% tariff. And it's a legitimate demand. Our border heading south is porous because our elite just doesn't care. And our elite also basically believes in the nobody's illegal, the migration of people wherever they want to go. And of course, because of that, we're also not taking fentanyl seriously. We're beginning to, but fentanyl comes in two ways. It comes in directly from Red China, and because we have very poor security at the port in Vancouver, very few of the containers are searched. So it comes in that way, or it comes in the ingredients come in, and then we've got gangster-run labs that cook the stuff and ship it down to the States and, of course, in Canada. Trump's absolutely right. It's a killer. And I'm not sure if Trump said this or one of his associates, but it's a form of biological warfare against us, against North America. That's absolutely true. So some of his demands are not at all unreasonable, and our government very belatedly is trying to answer the concerns. But this business of the 51st state, which he keeps bringing up, is really wearing out the goodwill that's there, and it certainly, I think, behooves us to look very seriously for other trading partners. So we're not as completely dependent on the Americans as we are now. We should be looking, in my opinion, at the old Commonwealth, at India, and more emphasis on Japan. We've got to diversify. Anyway, that's the lessons we learned thus far.
Okay.
And of course, Trump's attitude completely negates any idea of, cultural, ethnic dedication to the soil and to your flag and to your nation. I'll tell you, Jim has limited time and he wants to ask a couple of questions. So I'm going to let Jim ask his questions.
Yeah. I understand I've received material from you, Paul, regarding a court case in Canada regarding a man called Bory. And I've looked at this. Can you explain why that court case is of such importance to civil liberties in Canada?
Okay, it's a court case involving a man named Leslie Bory. And Les is a self-described politician. He's a machinist. He's run for federal and provincial offices a number of times, and he has a something like what you have, a podcast, and he calls it Radio Brantford. Brantford's the small city he lives in, which is about 30 minutes west of where I am in Hamilton, which is in the central part of Ontario. Anyway, he's been doing it for about 2.5 years, and in my opinion, he sometimes maybe oversells the case. But he was charged on the 13th of February in 2023 with 1 count under Canada's hate law, willful promotion of genocide. Now, nobody has ever been charged with that before. 1 count of willful promotion of hatred against a privileged group, in this case Jews, and 3 counts of uttering threats. Threats against Jews, threats against police, and threats against politicians, and a count of unsafe storage of ammunition. okay, the unsafe storage that we disposed of fairly quickly and convinced the judge to direct a verdict of not guilty. I won't go into the particulars, but it just didn't fit. Uttering threats against Jews was already covered by the so-called hate law, so that was dropped. It was significant because nobody has ever been charged before with willful promotion of genocide. It's a seldom used part of the hate law. Of course, genocide is a fuzzy term. You might think so, but the Jews would like you to be guilty of advocating genocide if you say from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free. In my opinion, that's just aspirational. It would be a better thing if they were free, okay? And that was their land from the river, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. So, it sounds, it seems fairly straightforward. It isn't. The trial was actually a rather quick one. 2.5 days were taken up with the jury listening to about I'd say about 12 hours worth of his programs, his videos. In my opinion, they were really boring. No, I mean, not all of them, but the jury must have been bored. I mean, not everything. You and the three of us are engaged in politics. If you're not, a lot of this would seem a little, well, not exciting or over your head. My hope was they would be bored and he would not testify. And by the time they came to deliberate, they might have forgotten a lot of what they heard. But that's not the way it worked out. He did testify at some length, and he said, well, look, he spent 23 months in remand. He could not get bail. All sorts of people who come in, vicious, violent crimes, including murder in Canada, get bail. But our system is quite lax about people who do harm, wound people, kill or shoot people or kill people, and very harsh if you have the wrong ideas. So his position was, I did 23 months in remand. I want my day in court. I want to explain myself. Unfortunately, I think he had a very conventional jury, to be nice, or stupid, to be more to the point. I think he talked himself into, well, he repeated the more inflammatory things he said. Then he was cross-examined. That highlighted the inflammatory comments further. And then in the submissions, the Crown again highlighted the controversial points, and he was duly convicted. One count of willful promotion of hate against Jews. One count of advocating genocide against Jews, and one count of uttering threats against police, and one count of uttering threats against politicians. The judge, very interestingly, released him on his own recognizance, and there will be a sentencing hearing on the 10th of March. That's the people who are experienced in the courts read the entrails there and say the judge clearly feels his 2 years, virtual 2 years in jail, that's his sentence, and that he will be probably sentenced to time served. The judge seemed to have no interest in restricting him, just the usual admonition to be of good behavior, say keep out of bars and don't punch anybody out. But there was, he wasn't restricted about going on the internet. He wasn't restricted about social media. So, I'm doing radio, so I'll call you back, okay? Okay.
Is this likely to lead to further prosecutions? Is it going to become a test case?
Well, this what really worries us is the willful promotion of genocide. Unfortunately, he, I think, overstated the case. For instance, he said, next Saturday, that's the radio audience, should come with your guns and gather at my place, and we have to take action. Now, this is in the context. This is hyperbole. He didn't expect anybody to show up at his place the next Saturday, and indeed, of course, nobody did. In context, it's shooting off your mouth or overstating the case. I don't think the jury was very well instructed, and unfortunately, comments like that give the jury that I thought was very unsophisticated something to hang it on. Well, that sounds like a threat. I think it was against police, but that sounds like a threat. And his criticism of Jews being behind an awful lot of the problems we have sounds like willful promotion of hate. This is a real problem.
The reason I asked you this, I don't know if you're aware as a patriotic civil libertarian, but Australia passed in Parliament a bit over a week now certain so-called hate laws that are also merged in the terrorism laws. Are you aware of that?
No, well, I was aware that there was some sort of new anti-hate legislation, but I didn't know the particulars.
Well, it's a situation where, to be fair to them, if I can for a moment, that if acts of violence have an aspect of intimidation, what they're calling hatred, or they're merging together the human rights type law with anti-terrorism. So you're not being charged for hate, you're being charged for terrorism. And all of the business of hate aggravates the issue of terrorism. The interesting thing is the excuse has been an organised campaign in Australia of anti-Semitic violence. And there's been a number of schools, daycare centres, vehicles and other places that have been damaged by people leaving behind slogans either criticising Jewish people or Israel or something like this. Now, from our point of view, what's the amazing thing is the police have actually arrested some of the physical perpetrators. And they all appear to be, to use an old phrase, sub-proletarian criminals, not political activists. In fact, the police have conceded these people are not political activists. They've been paid to do it. And the only question is who's paid them. And then they're not saying. But these laws have been rushed through Parliament. And at the same time, it's not just Jewish people. They've added transgender people. They've added gender differentiation. They've added women. They've added a number of other things to these laws. And I was discussing with a legal person the other day that just say you got involved in an unfortunate argument with a transgender person, some words were said, maybe you do the wrong thing and you actually lash out and hit that person and inadvertently cut them, and you scream some abuse at them. The crime's not that you carried out an assault with possible aggravated circumstances. It could be a terrorism offence. It carries a maximum of 6 years jail. And this is extraordinary stuff. So when I saw the Bori case, I was wondering, obviously, whether or not you start talking about genocide. I mean, genocide is Rwanda. Genocide is something you could argue that the parts of the Serb army in the massacre in Bosnia in 94 or 93, that was possibly a genocidal act. But you certainly can't argue that some sort of mild physical violence or even some minor damage to a school or something necessarily is terrorism. So we've actually passed these incredible laws, one with no evidence that there's any really concerted thing happening. except for this criminal gang, which no one wants to say what it is. I'm in the process of doing some research on this. I will be publishing, and naturally you folks over there are welcome to use this. But it seems that we're actually setting up a partly human rights-oriented Canadian police state, but at the same time we're masking it as anti-terrorism. And there's obviously a lot to consider here. So I'll try to keep you chaps briefed on this, and it might be of some service to you.
Yeah, I'd be very interested, Doctor. The terrorism is used very promiscuously, both in the United States and Canada. Right to life, Catholic parents were categorized by the FBI before Donald Trump's purge as domestic terrorists. These are people with an opinion. They aren't throwing bombs. In Canada, a young fellow with no real history of involvement in any nationalist groups ran over a family of Muslims about 4 years ago, killed 4 of the 5 of them. They were Pakistani Muslims. He was charged with murder, attempted murder, and terrorism, and he was convicted. I don't see the terrorism. He was not part of an organized. I mean, for terrorism, it seems to me there has to be some sort of organization and some sort of political or religious or some other goal, which will involve serious acts of violence to try to pursue that goal. His is a very interesting case in that he seems to have very few prior involvements. He was very possibly under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and he'd been through a big emotional setback because the closest person to him and his family, his grandmother, had died a couple of days before. These aren't excuses, but these I think are factors. The terrorism, of course, is a term used to terrify the populace, especially in Canada, where we're a very weak, effeminate country, and we've very much got that female spirit. Too many of our people, they just want to be safe. So you say those bad terrorists out there will protect you. Well, in terms of the real terrorists, other than the Israelis, if they want to protect us, cut back on immigration or screen immigration.
Well, I actually went on record the other day, this terror gang that's supposed to be going around in Australia. It's my actual belief that it is a creature of the Mossad. And if it was Islamic-based, they would recruit young, highly discontented men from some of Sydney's suburbs and enroll them in such a terrorist movement and get them to do these things. And you would have no problem if you were secretive in what you did. And of course, anything can be penetrated. But you would luckily recruit in a city like Sydney, at least 100 young men who would be prepared to do this. Islamic terrorism has one advantage over any other model. There's like a conveyor belt that actually also produces what's called in this pseudo-literature lone wolf actors. But they can produce lone wolf actors by the dozen. Other people can only produce maybe one. So you get these people in the United States who've been charged with, terrorism acts. I would say it's politically motivated violence, and there's a big difference. I'm sure you agree, Paul, as a lawyer. There's a big difference between politically motivated violence and terrorism. And in Australia, there's been attempts to actually, I don't want to add terms and words that maybe some people might not follow, but in the political literature, there's a thing called, and I know you've heard of it, called spontaneism. And a few good old boys getting together and deciding to do something that's illegal isn't necessarily terrorism, it's spontaneism, and it's extremely stupid. And the other problem is you don't get away with it because there's no plan for the continuity of the terrorist organisation. Whatever we may think of the Basque separatists or the IRA or Action Direct or any of these movements, they don't want to do one job, but they want to do 50 jobs. A lot of these people on particularly the so-called right side of politics who've been done for this, they've never thought past the action that they do. The young Muslim people, of course, that may be so, but they're put out on a conveyor belt of people. There's one man this week, another man the next week, and another man the next week, and on it rolls. And if there is a master behind it all, then that is a terrorist operation. Of course it is. But in Australia, we deal, like you do, with this hysteria about terrorism. It was the anniversary yesterday. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, of the Hilton Hotel bombing. Ever heard of that?
The which?
The Hilton Hotel bombing in
No.
Australia.
No.
It's 47 years ago. And the hot theory that's been around for 47 years is the bomb was put there by a political police agency. It was meant to be found because of some stuff up in the times of garbage bin operators. The bomb was picked up, put in a compactor, and it detonated. Killed a police officer, killed a couple of garbage men, wounded about 20 other people. This sort of terrorism that they talk about that kicked off the whole psychosis in Australia about terrorism has never been solved. And yet there is a pervasive and very, very good argument that it was a security operation gone wrong. And after all this time, no commission of inquiry, nothing. So like you, I'm very wary of any allegation of terrorism, and particularly on our side of the political fence, I'm even more wary of it. I take it you've come across from time to time chatter in the broad Canadian patriot movement that might lend itself to that, might be taken up by a security operative and misdirected. Have you come across that?
Yes. Well, my policy is that the minute somebody starts talking about violence, I tell them to be quiet, or I walk the other way. And it's usually somebody who's not very well known to you, or somebody who's new, and I just smell a police agent. Canada has banned a number of organizations as terrorist organizations. A number of them are Islamic, but every now and again they want to put a so-called nationalist group up there. One that was banned about 2 years ago was Blood and Honor. I knew Blood and Honor. I was at a couple of their concerts before they were banned. They were, they had their own, what you might call skinhead music. They had, a number of speakers, myself included. I knew of no acts of violence. So the elite in Canada tosses that term around pretty liberally. What you were saying about professional terrorist organizations, that was one of the things that caused me a lot of concern about 9/11. The apparent organization and money, the hijacking of the several planes, the ones that went into the World Trades, the Twin Towers, the one that supposedly hit the Pentagon, and the one that crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Okay, it might be all as we were told, but what amazed me is there was no follow-up, and professional terrorist organizations like the IRA or the UDF or the Basques know that the first act of violence will outrage people. People right across the spectrum, rallied around the flag in the United States. Almost nobody cheered. Oh, yay! They took out the Twin Towers. It united people, and it had a great propaganda value because there was growing sympathy for the Palestinians, the way they were being shot at and treated by the Israelis. And suddenly, the public opinion said, "Oh, I don't care. They're all Arabs. They're all bad. Kill them all. Let God sort them out." That type of thing. So it did not seem to accomplish what on the surface the purpose might have been. Also, there was no follow-up. That was the interesting thing, because terrorism only begins to succeed if the victim population begins to feel it's hopeless. You know, okay, they blew up the Twin Towers and hit the Pentagon last week. If this week they shoot up a mall, and then next week they shoot up another mall at the other side of the country, then people get discouraged and say, well, what do they want? Maybe we can do a deal. But there was never any follow-up. And I found that very, very odd. Whereas the Irish, the IRA, that would have follow-up. And I'm not that aware of the separatists.
Well,
but they take it from it too.
There couldn't really be much follow-up, because the reality of Al Qaeda is it ultimately didn't exist. There was Osama bin Laden had a bag of money. He was taken advantage of. A plan was set in motion, a plan which the CIA and FBI knew about, where the legend has it that it was due to a rivalry between these two agencies that led to the information not filtering out. But anybody that has studied the neocon hawks realizes that it was they were willing, like all good Zionists, to sacrifice American people for the pursuit of geopolitical goals. Now, I want to go back to something Jim said. I think it should be qualified. When you mentioned Mossad and the attacks in Sydney, you didn't actually explain why you believe.
Oh, right. Okay. You've got a criminal gang. We all know about the concept of plausible deniability. The police now have several of these people in custody, and there's very little doubt that in the end they're going to talk. They're not revolutionaries. They're not trained. They're just criminals. There's a number of possible suspects. You could think it could be some international drug dealer very upset that for once the Israeli police did the right thing and they stopped the distribution of MDMA or something like that, and to get back at them, he attacks targets. Maybe ridiculous. It could be a group of Muslim extremists who have hired Australian criminals and they use them in a way. But one thing Muslim extremists would never do, they would never put up slogans about Israel and underneath it put swastikas. They're not going to do that, even if they were saying that the Israelis act like fascists. They would still not do that. They wouldn't put the name of Allah next to Hitler on top this time. Well, that's not what a Muslim extremist group would do, unless it was being so disinformationist that its message was so lost in it, why would you bother? And then it comes back to one other possible suspect. We know that Mossad is a brilliant organisation, no doubt about that. But what they did to Hezbollah in Lebanon a few months ago with the exploding pages and all that is to be regarded as highly professional, incredibly cunning, very effective. Yes. But in Australia, sleepy Australia, where you're trying to whip up support amongst the Australian population to get involved in this issue in the Middle East and get involved on Israel's side, then what do you need? Well, you need violence directed against a Jewish school, a kindergarten with 3-year-old babies in it or something like that.
But Jim, there's a more direct, rather than that wide speculation. One of these people apprehended said that they'd received money. You remember that, don't you?
Received money, that's right.
An unknown
organisation overseas. Now, who could this be? And in all the debate that's gone on in Australia, no one, the journalists, to call them paid is an understatement, but not a single journalist has gone on one of their opinion columns and said, okay, who paid them? Someone paid them. First principle, as you know, Paul, first principle of Italian criminology, who pays? Yep. Who pays? And if we had an Italian examining magistrate, he'd be running amok right now saying, well, where'd you get the money from? And nothing. So, as I said, we've activated the entire machinery of state, passing laws But it could all be blamed by the idea it was a Mossad operation. A few years ago, Mossad actually misused Australian passports to carry out an assassination in Dubai. They shot some fellow, I think it was actually Hamas, actually, I can't remember now, but a major player. And that's what they did. They never asked Australia for permission. Also in Australia too, we have an intriguing, I started to read a PhD written by some chap the other day about the reaction of media and allegations of terrorism. We've had a number of major terrorism trials in our country. There's one that's the subject of an inquiry right now, the conviction of 6 Croat migrants going back 40 odd years. And the police set these guys up. They loaded them up with gelignite. They perjured, they bashed them, they did everything they could, false confessions to convict these men. And some of these police involved in it, if I call them scum, Paul, it's an understatement. They're the vilest, they're criminals themselves, absolute criminals, these men. And
Jim,
they've done this.
Jim, this obviously is a topic all of its own, and
Well,
perhaps
it is. I should hold
particularly
it.
relevant to Canada.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to you, Paul,
Yeah,
and
sorry,
ask. That's all right. I'm going to go back to Paul and ask. It didn't take Trudeau long to pull the pin after Trump got in, did it?
Well, no. He was desperately unpopular in the polls, and had been for a year and a half. It looked as though the Conservatives, as soon as an election is not due until this October, but if there's a vote of non-confidence, and the 3 major opposition parties have all agreed, as soon as they get back to Parliament, they will vote non-confidence and bring down the government. And the polls suggested the Liberals might win as few as 7 seats if an election were held a month and a half ago. And this would be a destruction of historical proportions. Okay. He then tried to replace his finance minister, who'd been a long-time ally of his, Chrystia Freeland, with this very shady international banker, Mark Carney. He was president of the Bank of Canada, then president of the Bank of England, and he has a major role in the UN trying to coordinate financial institutions to not to lend to the petroleum industry. He's a terrible menace, far worse than Trudeau. He's Trudeau with brains. And anyway, that it didn't work. And there was a revolt in the Liberal Party, and basically his caucus told him, we can't follow you anymore. So he announced his resignation. The Liberal Party is having a leadership race, and they'll have their decision, I think, by March the 10th. And then, so in the meantime, he prorogued Parliament. So while we're going through these problems with the United States, the constant threat of tariffs, the 51st state talk, Trudeau, there's the Parliament's not in session, and there's some conservative freedom folks with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms are actually taking this to court on constitutional grounds that he had no justification other than political expediency to prorogue Parliament. So we are in a very, very tumultuous time. But just back to the terrorism issue. One of the results of October the 7th, or I guess it's October the 6th, is that the constant pro-Palestinian protests and the ongoing brutality of the Israelis, coming dressed as Darth Vader, shooting Palestinian kids, buildings all reduced to rubble, hospitals attacked. There has been a tremendous shift in sympathy the Zionists and from Israel. And that's been their strong suit since World War II. We're the victims. Did I mention Auschwitz? Yes, I mentioned 6 million. We're the victims. Well, a lot of people went along with that, but the polls now show that a very significant number of people, and particularly a large number of people under 40, no longer buy that. In fact, over 25% of the under 40s question whether the Holocaust actually happened or whether it was exaggerated, which is dangerous territory in Canada, which of course has a state religion, and it's not Christianity, it's not Islam, it's Holocaust. So what we have seen is a number of apparently outrageous things. One Jewish school in Toronto has been shot at in the middle of the night 3 times in the past 9 months. Well, they've got cameras. It's odd that they never catch the perps. A perp wanting to take the risk of discharging a firearm, surely he'd want to do it to do more than just put a hole in the door of a building. It's of course, the minute that happens, the press is all weepy and shows up with the cameras, and various politicians show up with donkey faces denouncing, anti-Semitism and all the rest of it. I think you have to look at every alleged act of terrorism very, very carefully.
It all comes back to that, hey, Rabbi, what you're doing, trope, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Very much so. And of course, when you were talking about the diluting of the Holocaust myth, and that's not questioning the reality of it. We all intelligent people will appreciate a mythos has built around it, and it was central to the West and the global, fiduciary order post World War II. So, if the heart of that is shown to be corrupt, and that myth deteriorates, does that mean that what we're effectively living in, let's call it a unified state, an anti-racist state, does that mean anti-racism as the formulative basis for a society is now in danger?
Well, I've seen a number of Jewish spokesmen in Canada turn against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And left-wing Jewish professors were only too happy to pump this hatred of whites and delegitimizing the European settlement in Canada and Australia, etc., as anti-racism and decolonization, until the Palestinians picked up that motif and said, well, down with the Zionists because they're colonialists, they're occupying our land, which ironically is true. That much is true. And now there's been a very significant Jewish revolt against DEI, and I noticed Donald Trump is really purging it from the federal civil service and the American government, and that's good. But the Jewish writers I've seen are only soured on DEI when they became, or the Zionists became the target of the third world anger. As long as various native groups were saying, they won't even call Canada, they call it Turtle Island. I don't know why you want to call your country after I was going to say a rodent, but after a turtle. But that was fine. And our government was being actively denigrating our, most of our heroes from the past. but that is under tremendous pressure in the States. And we like to pretend we're different, but after Trend takes hold in the United States, a couple of years later, it's picked up in Canada, and I think we will see the decline of DEI, thank heavens. But certainly the significant Jewish opposition to it is entirely selfish. It's only because the Palestinians decide to use those types of arguments against the Zionists in Israel.
So Jim, panning the question back to you, do you feel that with the weakening of the Holocaust mythos, the anti-racist state itself, theoretically at any rate, it's
it's always been something that's existed in Australian society. Several years ago, one of the top conservatives said that the Holocaust and related matters is now a part of conservative ideology. It's crept everywhere, but allowing for events that occur, various atrocities occur around the world. But when you get atrocities, and Gaza is an atrocity, one atrocity doesn't justify another. And that's what I suppose what a lot of the younger people, particularly those who might have been swept up in some of the left-wing movements that have been very active over Palestine in particular, a lot of the emphasis in Australia has been targeting Trotskyites and others who've raised this settler colonial ideology material. And some of them actually said that. Jews came to Israel after the Second World War, asserting various types of persecution from the fascists and so on. But what they did was they created a state that was a parody of that, and they then visited that upon the Palestinian population. Now, whether Israel likes it or not, or the supporters of Zionism in Australia like it or not, there's a lot of people think that. And they might agree with the Zionists that the Nazis did terrible things to Jews and the communists did terrible things to Jews. But what gives the Zionists the right to turn Gaza into a ruin? Answer, nothing, other than immediate events, but that doesn't justify it either. So I think that the use of the Holocaust as a tool has actually become ineffective. In fact, I would say it was ineffective actually for all intents and purposes a long time ago. The Palestinian cause, of course, was weakened by the Zionists actually supporting Islamists. As we know, Hamas was set up with some of the assistance of Zionism, and that is true. And it was designed to undermine Yasser Arafat's genuine Palestine nationalist movement that had a lot of support amongst all sorts of people, left-wing people, right-wing people, all sorts of people admired Yasser Arafat. So when we look at Middle Eastern politics, we're all getting an enormous lesson here, a massive lesson in duplicity and untruthfulness and everything that goes with it. And I think at the end of the day, despite the propaganda, Paul, in my country, that, patriots in Australia, decent people and all that have to support Israel, I think it's become this enormous moral qualms. Even the Christian Zionists, I get funny reports, even these people in their churches, saying all the wrong things about the Bible. A lot of these people can't justify it to themselves either. I always thought the Bible taught peace. It doesn't teach you can exterminate a whole section of the population because that's part of God's plan. That doesn't work. And it might work for a few idiots, but it doesn't work. So I think there's a big turn. I think there's a big turn.
Well, I see the same thing that there's a revulsion at what's happening in Gaza. If the Israelis had gone in and killed 3,000 or 4,000 people and done some damage as they could to Hamas and then waved their fingers and said, "Let that be a warning. Don't do it again." I think people would have
got away with it.
Would have gone along with it. But I mean, what is happening here is a genocide. My circle is commemorating and has for 20 years the February 12th and 13th, the bombing, terror bombing of Dresden. and the destruction of 500,000 people, most of them refugees, in a horrible, horrible, you know, fiery, fiery death. And yeah, I think that there's a feeling that even if one was sympathetic to the Israelis and you know didn't thought the attack was dirty, was bad, or whatever, to go in and punish them for yeah, that might be one thing, but to obliterate the place. And now Donald Trump's just wackadoodle idea that you deport all the Palestinians or move them off, and then America's going to take care of all the unexploded ordnance and build casinos and set up a Riviera in the Eastern Mediterranean, and there'll be jobs and peace for all. It's not clear that the Palestinians would be allowed back in to participate in these glorious times, but the idea that you can simply ethnically cleanse them, and that's what happened after the Second World War to 16 million Germans in the East.
That idea is giving Netanyahu everything he wants, which is disgusting. And let's not forget that the various layers of its many intelligence services knew in advance about the coming October 7th attack. And they not only sacrificed their own people, but in their they collaterally killed a lot of them in their immediate military response. Now, gentlemen, as it comes closer to 1 o'clock, I want to ask, we've spoken a bit about the negative of Donald Trump, but you know we have to take him holistically, and he has just recently picked up the phone to Putin and reported on a very constructive conversation. I do believe this presages the advent of the end of the Ukrainian conflict. Can I get your thoughts on that, starting with Paul?
Well, I'll put it directly. It pains me to see good white stock slaughtering good white stock, and that's what's happening in the conflict in between Russia and the Ukraine. I half believe Trump that had he been president, he would not. Putin might not have invaded, and the invasion. That's certainly it happened, but Putin did have some very valid issues that were simply being ignored, thanks to the Zionists in the American government egging on their fellow Zionists. This former actor, and one of his great stage acts, and I'm sure you've seen it, but he and a partner are at a piano supposedly playing it with their penises. Oh, how amazing. But I think Trump will do a deal. He likes making deals, and there's got to be something that will satisfy Putin. He won't get all that he wants, but there are parts of the Ukraine that are predominantly Russian. Well, it's not unreasonable to have them, if they want, and I think there's pretty strong evidence they do, especially in Crimea, that they want to be part of Russia. Well, them's the breaks. And I have a feeling that this talk of rare minerals, which are very important now to the technology that we're into, I think there will be some sort of deal that will sweeten things for the Ukrainians. Neither side is going to get all it wants, but I just think it's heartbreaking to see the slaughter. Whether they're Russians or Ukrainians, these are good white stock. It's like the fratricidal war of World War I, where we slaughtered each other with great abandon.
Well,
I know there's a peace song. You probably No, it's then the band played Waltzing Matilda.
Yeah.
Boy,
Well, if
did really good.
if Putin does get anything out of it, I get it. He gets what he originally wanted, which was bloody NATO off his back. Although I notice in the English press they're already, waving the noisemakers to try and say in a few years Putin is setting up to attack Europe. Yeah. Anyway, Jim, I haven't got your comment.
Very briefly. As you'd remember, as this war's gone on, the Ukraine, I don't like to call them Ukrainian because of the domination of a clique in charge of Ukraine. I'll simply call it the Ukraine system, said that the Russians were using human wave attacks and the Ukrainian army were having smashing success, and we've only had 35,000 men killed and all this sort of stuff. Last week or the week before, Zelensky admitted to the casualty lists, and they're not far short of the Russian list. The Russian list, they say, is just a little bit more. The interesting thing is, it seems to be that the clique ruling Ukraine have been claiming the salaries of the men who have in fact been butchered on the front lines, claiming them as alive. And I can't imagine any more grotesque a system than would do that. I think when the war is over, there will be some sort of revolution in Ukraine. And I think that Ukraine will become a neutral state, not just because that will be the treaty, but because the people of Ukraine have been through this. It's much better to be a neutral state. And that's all I can say at this stage. Thank you.
Well, they got along well with the Russians, considering the historical tensions up until 2014, when egged on by a new
Victoria Newland. Victoria Newland.
And American money, or probably CIA money, that they staged the Yellow Revolution. And I think that Putin had genuine concerns. If Canada were to adopt a more independent foreign policy, one thing I would like to see is drop all sanctions and all the freezing of all Russian or certain Russian bank accounts in Canada. Drop all the sanctions and say, we have no quarrel with you. We don't want you intruding on our part of the Arctic, of course, but we have no quarrel with you. I'd say the same to Iran. I don't see the quarrel between Canada and Iran. We don't have a dog in that race. We should have full trade with them. And the Middle East, I think you were mentioning, Doctor, the treachery, the endless and the false flags. And if October 6th was a false flag, or at least the vaunted Israeli intelligence, the Mossad and the Shin Bet, they didn't know it was coming. Well, I mean, people should have lost their jobs, if not their lives. Okay, well, then if they did know it was coming, is it the sort of immoral thing that Churchill did when he apparently had advanced intelligence that the Germans were going to bomb Coventry? And he sacrificed, I don't know how many, but a fair number of British lives for that. But it's criminal. I think the only, for relatively innocent, moral people like ourselves, I think the only response, or the only course in the Middle East is trade with all and aid to none. And we're not taking sides. We're not taking sides.
Very true.
We'll have to adopt that as a motif. Well, it's around 1 o'clock for you,
Thank you,
Jim.
Yep.
But if you're saying goodbye, then
I will do, but I'd like to wish Paul good luck in this election. I'm involved in one myself. Check our website, and hope to provoke the same reaction you're working on provoking there. So good luck. Perhaps with the assistance of our compere, we should speak again soon in maybe a couple of months' time.
Yeah, all the very best in the election.
Thank you.
And Paul, I'll ask you to tell a little bit about your candidacy here, where it is, what you're running for, and what your platform is.
Well, I'm running in what's called Etobicoke Centre. That's in the west end of Toronto. It's a solidly middle-class suburb. I grew up there, and I went to high school there. And my platform is our party is called the Canadians' Choice Party, and it's a radical populist party. What we don't have a strong party platform, and the idea is what the original idea in the British parliamentary system, that a person was elected by his constituents and owed his loyalty to them. And various political thinkers like Edmund Burke and others warned of the danger of the party system. Parties were not going to be a good thing, and because they become factions, they become dominated by a leader who, and this is really strong in Canada, less so in Australia and Britain, but the leader runs it. The leader sets the policy, and members of parliament are often just clapping seals for their party. That when the party leader gets up and speaks, they all clap and hurrah and so on. And very often, the interests of people's members' constituents are sacrificed for the greater good of the party. So our party would do politics differently. We would use surveys, online town hall meetings, and various other ways to gather opinion. What are the issues this month that concern you? And we would actively canvass all the voters and try to get them into the habit of responding. At first, a lot would not, but some would, and hopefully many would. And those would be the issues I would raise in the provincial legislature. Well, what's of concern to the people in Etobicoke Centre? The problem, I can almost guess, traffic gridlock. And I'd be asking the Minister of Transport, why have you not protested to the federal government? You know traffic gridlock's a hopeless problem, and has been for 20 years. Why don't you protest to the Prime Minister every time they announce immigration numbers? You're just pouring more people into a constricted area, leading to more traffic gridlock.
Well, why we don't, because it wouldn't bloody help. In fact, I think it was Paul Keating, or one of our prime ministers, after the fact admitted that there's an unspoken agreement between the parties that none of them will ever raise the topic of immigration. And they won't, because, as we determined earlier, we live in a anti-racist state based on a Zionist myth. But just before, when you said that parties fall foul, at least in Canada, to a strong leader, well, in a sense, Donald Trump represents a party, but he doesn't. He represents a movement, and that's MAGA. And in that sense, I'm getting the strong feeling there's a bit of the autocrat about him. And that seems to be what people want at the moment, a decisive, strong leader who will drain that swamp. And
I think on that level, you're absolutely right. The challenge is going to be to deliver reduced inflation and prosperity. That's what he promised. That is going to be more difficult, I think, than getting control of the border and deporting the illegals. That's been a very determined and brave thing he's done, and very effective. The economy, though, is sometimes capricious. It can be influenced by external factors. But he will be given, I would say 6 months or a year of grace, an opportunity. He certainly made a very good impression in most ways so far. That's going to be the big challenge. Now, as a Canadian nationalist, while I approve a lot of what he does, I'm not happy with these trade threats and tariff threats, and with this the really silly talk of being the 51st state, assuming he believes people should have a say in it. Right now, I doubt you'd get 5% approval.
It's absolutely appalling, isn't it, to just suggest that people invested in their own, in themselves. A nation is its people. And this gets back to what you're mentioning. He's also got to fight a battle on the economic front. But this is the poison of the West, isn't it, to see an economy and not the people it services.
Yeah.
We look at an economy, and because of that, there's all these migrants here, because consumption is the number one requirement of a system. Consume. It's terrible. But don't let me just ask you about an equivocacy of Trump in Canada, your opposition leader there. Now, he seems to be cut from a similar sort of cloth, but obviously being an Australian, I don't know the full grit about him. I just see him saying good things here and there when the media give him a chance to, shutting up the obvious leftists, etc. What's your take on him?
Well, Pierre Poilievre,
name him. What's his name?
His name is Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
He's a career politician. He got elected in his mid-20s as a member of parliament. He's been there for, I think, almost 20 years. He has basically conservative instincts. The big fear is that he does not get the racial issue. He recently announced his immigration policies, which would be to have 200 to 250,000 immigrants a year. What the numbers were under the previous Conservative government. Trudeau is bringing in 500,000 a year, plus temporary foreign workers and temporary people on student visas, all of whom require accommodation. So in that sense, Poilievre is a bit better than Trudeau. But what's needed is what's advocated by Maxime Bernier, who is the leader of the People's Party of Canada, and he is calling for a moratorium, which I've called for 30 years. Poilievre is making noises against DEI, and what I would hope if he wins, that he has the determination to go after it. They will have to purge the federal civil service and or read them the Riot Act. Now, Donald Trump, in that sense, is showing the way. I mean, but this federal civil service are a nest of far left serpents, and even previous moderate conservative governments complained that they felt themselves being undermined by the predominantly liberal civil service. So does Poilievre have the insight and the courage to do that? I don't know. Perhaps he has. I don't want to be unfair to him. He's of course a tremendous Zionist, and just trips over himself to denounce pro-Palestinian protests, to pledge his complete support for Israel and so on, in a way that the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau does not. I mean, he denounces violence and he supports Israel's right to defend itself, but he has expressed some doubts about what's the battering of Gaza.
It's strange, isn't it, how after the Second World War, this tiny little fingernail of the earth, over there in the Middle East, has managed to command our nations, our politics, and I cannot understand why any clear-thinking man would elevate that terrible little state in importance above their own people. And whether we are conscious of it or not, that's what happens. And in Australia, and I'm sure in Canada, it's the duty to the Jew has been the reason for this, over masking taping of discrimination, anti-discrimination law upon anti-discrimination law upon that. It is advocated for by the very vocal Zionist sector, and yet they speak, as if Israel's our next door bloody neighbour. It's not. It's incredible, the psychological impact and the amount of propagandas around the need to be anti-fascist post Hitler and Mussolini. It really is, and it's sent it spiraling into a dialectic where we get a sort of another version of that from the complete opposite. In that. Well, Paul, it sounds like you've got some people you have to call, etc. It's been a great chat. I hope to speak to you again and catch up when events unravel a little bit more clearly, whether Trump has got his... You never know if he's got his tongue in his cheek when he... whether, of course, like you said earlier, whether he's trying to rattle Trudeau, who I get the feeling he particularly dislikes. But in any event, at least he's got that bastard to throw, to jump out, which it must come as a relief, even though you have no idea who's coming next. So I'll let you get back to it. Thanks very much for giving us your time, Paul, and best of luck with your election.
Well, thank you, and thanks to you and Dr. Saleam. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and I hope we can do it again really soon.
We will.
Okay.